Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me out there. Okay, I saw a head nod. Great. All right. Zoe's not joining us today. She's on a deadline with Trail Runner Outside or Women's Running, one of the many publications she's currently working for. Yeah, we should have Sarah and Kristen popping on here in a second, and then we will get into everything. Hope you guys have had a good week. Well, all right. Anyways, we'll get into it a little bit. Want to first talk about mental setbacks. This is kind of like the leftovers from last week's call. We didn't quite have enough time to get to all of I think you could just do hours of talk on working through setbacks as a runner, and the mental and emotional component to this is really important. Athletes often have just setbacks on the mental side. So we want to get into that a little bit. And then later on in the call, we'll do a rapid fire kind of Friday deal questions and stuff like that with the remaining time. So yeah, diving into this topic, I think the first thing to really think about is like, what is motivation? How does that affect our mental states when we're training? Why do we sometimes have an ebb and flow when it comes to motivation? And I think even before that, just having the caveat, or maybe lowering some of the stigma around the ebb that exists in the training process is just really important. I don't know a single athlete who has never gone through a mental low in their training. Last week, and if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to last week's podcast, all the coaches talked about setbacks that they've gone through, or hypothetical setbacks that they've seen in other athletes, that they've kind of seen in the community. And all of that does, there's always an underlying mental component to that. I don't know anybody who fully goes through a setback and doesn't experience lack of motivation, struggles with mental health, maybe struggles with physical health that result from some of the mental things that they're feeling. And so, we don't always know why this happens, but it is really normal. As much as we don't enjoy it, it is really, really normal. And so I hope everybody just in listening to this keeps that in mind. Because if you judge yourself for those periods where you're not feeling mentally like your best, and just for example, if it's a time where, for example, you don't want to go out and run, doesn't feel good to go run, and that's one of the things that a lot of athletes deal with, that's okay. I mean, that's, in my mind as a coach, that's not a reason to quit. That's not a reason to make drastic changes. That's just your body giving you some feedback. That's just your brain telling you, hey, maybe things aren't in alignment, and we can just take a step back and think about that. So what is motivation? I think, motivation is that thing that kind of like guides us in our behaviors. It's that thing that keeps us on track when we're working towards our goals. In my mind, motivation has like a purpose and a passion component to it. So it's, you feel motivated when you feel passionate about something. You feel motivated when there's purpose behind what you're doing. And sometimes when we forget about those things, or sometimes we have a long season of running, we lose a little motivation, that purpose, that passion, maybe that fire is not burning quite as bright. That's really normal. And we kind of just want to like listen to that and give ourselves a chance to reconnect every day. To, the simpler side of this, like it's just running. Kristen really reminded us of this last week when she was talking about some of the health stuff that she's gone through. It's just running. Just because you've got a plan in place doesn't make this any more than just running. Just because you're working with a coach doesn't make this any more than just running. And so when we make it out to be something bigger than it is, when we put it on a pedestal, that fall, when we lose motivation, often feels a lot worse. And so, one of my tips for athletes who are, dealing with a little bit of lack of motivation is just to remember it's just running. This is something that you started off doing because you were probably passionate about it, because you got enjoyment out of it. And so thinking about just like those very basic principles behind what you're doing is going to be really, really important. I know like this is probably a great time of year to talk about motivation because so you guys have been checking out the Rad Weekend updates. You know what the crew has been up to. It's been a crazy summer. We have 10, 20 athletes achieving or going for big goals basically every weekend for 3 to 4 months. It's a lot. It's a lot for a coach. It's a lot for the athletes. It's a lot for the community. And after you've gone through working towards a big goal, you spent the better part of a year working on it in broad terms, and then you've zoomed in for 2 or 3 months to really put in the specific work. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm mentally exhausted. Like I'm very tired. Running on trails takes a lot of mental focus. It takes a lot of mental energy. Running a marathon takes a lot of mental focus, a lot of mental energy. Like all of these big goals that we have, they do deplete our batteries. And so when we try to force our way through some of that time where our battery is low, often we don't recharge. And so this is a time of year where I really like to have athletes focus on recharging those batteries. I have tons of athletes right now. We're doing like some very easy base building. We're just continuing with the process. We're staying engaged, but we're not like hammering unless, maybe there's a goal coming up. I would love to maybe hear some of Sarah's perspective on this as the resident mental health expert. And just, Sarah, what are some tips that you might have for an athlete whose mental battery is just, they're having a little trouble kind of feeling energized right now? They've gone through a long season. That motivation is waning a little bit.
Yeah, so I think it's twofold, two things to consider. One is like to really be self-reflective and maybe check in with your coach, and just like, do you need rest? Like that's the first place to start. Like, is this lack of motivation, is this not wanting to get out of the door, like, is this a full body thing? Is it fatigue? Is it in other parts of my life? Like, am I just tired? So start there, because if that's the case, we want to address it right away. Right. But like, let's say like, no, like you're feeling pretty good overall. And it seems to just be like in general, some disconnection from the training, or just like some not feeling motivated in this particular part of your life. So if that's the case, I really encourage you to remember the concept of mood follows action. So it's not that the best or like the most consistent successful runners wake up every day feeling totally jazzed and they can't wait to get out to run, and then they run when they feel that excited. It's that we have to get out the door even when we don't feel excited. Like you can't wait for motivation to happen in order for you to get out the door. So it's like learning how to push through that don't wait for the motivation, push through the not wanting to, and then probably you'll get out the door and it'll feel good. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Mood follows action. So start with the action. What do you want to happen? And then hopefully the motivation will follow.
Yeah, I think that that's such a great tip. And that kind of leads me to thinking a little bit about habit and routine for athletes and how we work really hard to, and there's a reason why we're holding you all accountable as coaches. We get in the logs like 5, 6 times a day, or a day, no, 5, 6 times a week. And we really just try to like support you guys through that accountability so you can work on building that habit. Because I can tell you, in my own experience and with many other successful athletes, like Sarah mentions, like there are going to be times where you just don't feel jazzed to get out there. And I'm sure, Sarah, you can relate to this. You know, you put in over 1,000 days in your training log with Coach Zoe. I'm sure a lot of those days you were distracted. You have had, you know, clients you're working with, you had parental duties, you had other things that were kind of taking up your mental space, putting stress on your like ability to manage time, all of these things that make it more challenging to want to go run. And so when we formed those habits, when we've given ourselves that chance, it's almost automatic that we get out there. And I think that that's huge because one, like Sarah mentioned, mood always follows action, right? So if like we're not feeling our best, but we go and give it a shot, often the endorphins that we feel from running and things like that are going to make us feel a little bit better towards the end of that run. And when we finish, and then there's always a sense of accomplishment. I've been doing this like really regularly since like 2011 or something. And I still get that sense of accomplishment after I finished a run, whether it's just, you know, a Friday, 6 miles around the block, or it's, you know, that 20-mile training day. Like I always feel a sense of accomplishment. I think running is like one of the hardest sports there is for such a simple thing. It's just running. I think that because it has such a strong mental component and it is inherently difficult for a lot of people, they do feel that sense of accomplishment afterwards. And that's huge. Allow yourself to feel that way. Another tip, we talked a little bit about this. I think it was maybe last January, but we were discussing the fact that there is a seasonal component to this too. You know, we're getting into fall where the time change is coming up. And when that happens, a lot of athletes often feel down because of the lack of light that we all get. And so some people on my roster are transitioning to headlamp runs already in the mornings or the evenings, or part of their run is in the dark. And just the general like lack of light can really affect our mood and things like that. And so, you know, it's important to just know that, again, it's normal. Like that's happening to a lot of us. But on the other side of that, just give yourself that chance. Like Sarah said, you know, listen to your body, maybe take a step back to try to think about where those feelings are coming from. And then something I like athletes to do during periods where they're not feeling like fully motivated is either to just start running off the clock and not use their watch, because sometimes like we're tired, we put in a big effort. Maybe we just did a big race a few weeks ago or even a month ago or something. We're having trouble feeling like that speed and that lightness coming back. Like just getting pace off your watch or not using the watch at all can really help to take away some of that like external feedback that might be messing a little bit with your psyche out there. I know that's something that helps me. So those off the clock runs are really key. And another thing is like use the full range of your kind of like of your mileage range that your coach is prescribing you. I think that that's like really huge. Like try to finish feeling good rather than finishing, you know, oh, I got those extra 2 miles in, but they took a lot out of me mentally. I really had to work mentally for those last 2 miles. Like that's not something we want to do when, you know, we're seeing a pattern in motivational struggle. So just take a step back, feel free to do a little bit less. And even if it feels good to do less than the least amount prescribed, that's okay. Like I did that for a couple months last year and found that it was really beneficial for me, not only from, you know, a mental standpoint, but also because there is a connection between the mind and the body. If you're constantly pushing more than feels good, what happens, you're more susceptible to injury. And so we really want to stay in front of that stuff. So I wonder if that's a recommendation that kind of Sarah would also think about, but like just doing what feels good and trying to finish the run feeling good, even if that means doing less. And because when you finish feeling good, there's a positive association there, and you're much more likely to want to go out and run the next day. Super, super, super important. So another thing that I want to get into before, maybe we open it up to the other coaches or move on to another topic, is the idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which I see as a big component to, just not like feeling it mentally, or like some of these times where we're having trouble mentally. I have seen many times in my coaching career athletes who tend to over-index on external factors that are way outside of their control, and forget about the fact that we have to, as athletes, create that internal environment that motivates us to go out and train. Doing hard things has to come from within, not be reliant on externals. If, for example, if you are getting out there every day for 3 months purely because you have a 100 miler coming up, I can almost guarantee that when you finish the process of working through that 100 miler, whether you completed the goal or, maybe you fell a little bit short of that goal, your susceptibility to burnout and wanting to discontinue the process is exponentially higher than if you were more reliant on engaging in the process itself, connecting to something that felt personal to you. When you consistently rely on the external and you don't think about the internal environment that you're creating within yourself for that motivation, the purpose, the passion that kind of has to lie behind all of what we do, you realize when you get to the end that you're the same person you always were. And that's the hardest thing. These goals don't change who we are. They don't create the learning. It's the journey and the cumulative process that does. Kristen did a really great job of articulating that with regard to her setbacks in last week's call, and really painted a very good picture of, what it's like when you have a very strong internal environment and a personal connection to what you're doing, rather than being reliant on the goal itself, or like how people will perceive you working towards that goal or perceive you actually completing that goal. I mean, this is just such a common challenge for athletes in this community, outside of this community, in the trail running and running world, because we all are like really hardwired to be very goal oriented. And although that's normal, when we forget about the internal environment, it really brings up a lot of challenges. I think particularly I've had a lot of athletes like totally go off the rails when they realize like, oh my God, like for the last 3 years, all I've been focusing on is externals. I rely on my friends to get out the door. I rely on my goals to get me out the door. I rely on all of these things that are with, Strava and all of the social media and all of this stuff that I have no control over. And when athletes figure that out, especially when they figure out that the goal all along was something that they were working towards because of the way other people would perceive that goal for them and perceive the way that they work towards that goal, that immediately it leads to a cascading of almost, I don't like to use the word mental crisis or phrase, but like it can really lead to negative outcomes for the athlete, burnout, questioning the process, why they're doing this stuff, etc. So, Sarah, I don't know if you could just give a few tips. I don't like to talk too much, but a few tips on what athletes can do to maybe cultivate a little bit more of that intrinsic motivation and not rely so much on the external.
Uh, so, a big piece is connect the why, which we talk about all the time. So you want to be feeling connected to your values, your sense of self, like you. So connecting, running back to who you are as a person and like how it fits with like how you want to show up in the world, so that it has a much deeper meaning. And then self-determination is a really big part of intrinsic motivation. So, when if you're picking races, if you find yourself like reaching out to your coach because you want your coach to choose your race, which you shouldn't do, or picking your races based on like, well, my friends were doing that, it's not really my kind of race, but they wanted to do it. Like all of those things where you feel like someone else is making a choice for you and you're less involved in that process, then reduces like your intrinsic motivation and your like internal excitement about that goal. So you want to feel really empowered and like you're making these decisions, you're connected to the training plan. You understand, again, like not just like the why behind why am I running, but like maybe the why behind the training plan. Like sometimes that can help. Like why am I doing this workout on this day at this point in the training block? So feeling, again, like just that understanding of what you're doing and how it connects to other things. And then like actually competency is highly correlated to intrinsic motivation. So some of it is just learning and doing and showing up again and again. And it's just part of the process. Like you don't necessarily show up on day one. If anything, with this intrinsic motivation, you gain it as you gain skills related to the sport or to what you're doing. So it's something that just sort of happens naturally over time too.
Yeah, 100%. And I like the evolution and the progression that you kind of like mentioned there. It's normal for all of us to change our whys over time, for our values to sometimes even change a little bit. Our core values tend to stay somewhat the same throughout the course of our lives, but there is still some flexibility at the periphery. And I think it is really important to recognize that as athletes. Like the reason I run today might not be the same as the reason why I started running, back in 2011, or like why I was trailman in college or whatever it was. Like those reasons could be really different, but we need to be aware of those things. And that self-reflection process really plays just a key role in everything that we're doing, just taking that time. I can sense, again, I'm going to go back to Kristen's comments from last week, but there is a underlying tone of self-reflection in that process for her. And again, guys, if you haven't listened to that episode, I would really recommend spending some time with it. One, because it normalizes that challenges are inherent in this process. Even really amazing athletes like Kristen, are going to go through this stuff. But two, you can work through it. And if you start to think about some of the things that we've talked about, maybe you work with a professional if you need to, you can find the light at the end of the tunnel. And there's no definite like timeline for any of these things. I've for some reason, every fall I struggle with something. And like, I've just kind of noticed like that pattern for me. And I'm just like here doing the thing, and like knowing that eventually I get out of it and I feel good afterwards. And like a key component to that for me is like having those underlying values, having a solid why that I can, understand and articulate to myself that means things to only me. And it's not about the perceptions of other people or anything that is external. And I think that if athletes continue to work towards that, you can be prompted by your coach with that. You can just be prompted through self-awareness that you've built, whatever it is. Working with a therapist is a great idea too, or a mental performance coach. You can start to be better equipped for when you inevitably have to go through times like this. And that's really you guys avoid the pitfalls in the process as much as possible, but to also have some of those tips and tools for working through it. Because when we work through this stuff, it gives everything else so much more context and value. It relates back to like everything that we've been doing in such a meaningful way. It fills our lives up with joy. Like we aren't like the best versions of ourselves when everything's going right. Like really we're the product of all of the challenges and the trials that we've gone through. And that is not just about physical setback. It's about mental too, the mind and the body. That completes the picture of health, not one or the other, or not forgetting about the mental stuff completely, which, maybe I would think is a thing of the past at this point, but you never know. There's still some crazy stuff out there. All right. Well, unless any of the other coaches had just something they wanted to add to the conversation, I think we'll start to move on to the rapid fire Friday stuff. You guys good? All right, cool. Thank you guys. I want to start talking a little bit about some training stuff. The first one is, it's a question about running form. I was feeling you on this one, Drew, when we put this in on the list for the week, but it's a question about form and form improvements. When is it worth it to break down your form and rebuild better versus going with what is natural for your body? How long does it take for you to decide to make big form changes versus, and how do they affect long-term gains? How do we manage feelings of frustration or going backwards during that process? So a pretty loaded question here, but let's just start with the form stuff. When is it worth it to break your form down and rebuild it versus what's natural for your body? Drew, do you have an opinion on this? I feel like this is right up your alley.
I do, and my opinion's probably less useful. It's like everything else. It depends kind of where you're at in your training cycle. I don't like for anyone to work on like form related stuff when they're kind of leading into a big race or event. But really, when you're starting a training block, I don't see any reason why, volume tends to be lower. You're not engaged in workouts all the time. Like you're building your base. Really, it's a really great opportunity to kind of break things down and work on those little things, mechanics and form and gait and whatnot. Understanding that a lot of the things that you're going to do, like I'm going to hold my arms a little different, or I'm going to like strike the ground a little different. A lot of that might not feel normal as first, but that's why it takes practice, and that's why starting at the beginning of a training cycle is really important. I do also think that if someone's been running like their whole life a certain way and it's worked for them, it hasn't necessarily, whatever their form is, it hasn't necessarily produced injuries or aches or pains that really inhibit their ability to achieve their goals. Then it gets kind of tough to be like, well, I need you to change the way you strike the ground, or I need you to change your knee lift. I'd like to see that greater. I'd like to see you hold your hands a little bit different. All that kind of stuff. To me, it maybe matters a little bit less when you've seen success with what you've been doing. Regardless of if your form is perfect or your form needs work or whatever the reason you're having these thoughts, I don't see any drawbacks to working on something like those plyometrics and calisthenics that I know some of us do during certain parts of training too, whether it's like your knee lifts or your lunges or just like basic core related stuff. Generally, when you're a stronger runner, like your hips or whatever you're working on strengthening, your form is a little bit more efficient too, and tends to break down less the longer into races. But that's kind of my 2 cents on form, and I know it goes both ways. It just depends on the kind of runner you are and where you're at in your training.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points. Like, don't mess with what's working. Unless you've had, a PT analyze your form and be like, okay, you keep getting injured because, it's really obvious that you're, striking with the straight leg. And so you're really hitting your heel and it's not great for absorbing the impact forces of running. And we need to like adjust to having higher cadence and getting those feet underneath. Like, unless there's something like really very specific happening there, and the result of that form breakdown is, overuse injury or something like that, I actually really never recommend an athlete switches up their form. I think other than like really focusing on cadence, I almost never ask athletes to do anything drastic with their form, because normally like we're all kind of like, no one ever had to teach any of us how to run. When you were like a child, you just started running, right? Like you just kind of inherently learned it. Like we all can run. I didn't have to like teach you the basic biomechanical patterns when you started at Microcosm for how to run. Like you already knew it. And so a lot of the time, like the way we already run naturally is like natural to our bodies. And that is probably the primary way that you should be moving out there. The way that you normally move is most likely the way that is best for your body. Over time, I think we all notice subtle changes, though, especially athletes who have been doing like a lot of strides and hill work over a number of years. And this isn't something you might notice in your first year or your second year, but usually between like year 2 and 3, you start to notice like, oh my gosh, on my easy runs now, like when it used to be so much more difficult for me to feel light and quick, and I always had to go faster to feel light and quick, I feel pretty light and quick now when I'm running around town going very easy. And so like there are very subtle ways over time that we can make those adjustments. Like Drew mentioned, there's some certain like, dynamic warm-ups that we can do. I like athletes to do high knees and butt kicks because it's very neuromuscular. It helps us get that like quickness kind of feel going for athletes who, are trying to work, like avoid plotting and things like that out there. But in general, I like almost never recommend athletes tweak their form. Sometimes when we overthink our form and we tweak it, that's actually when an injury can occur. So we really, really, really want to make sure we're getting like the proper feedback on this stuff. It's got to come from an expert, not, not a coach who is, working virtually. Like, if you send me a video, 4 different angles of you running on the treadmill, I could absolutely offer you some form suggestions, but like based on just feedback, like verbally in a log, there's almost no way I'm going to tell you to change your form. It's just not enough information. Kylee, I'm curious, because last week when you talked a little bit about your journey and your setback coming back from your injury, you mentioned maybe working through some form changes and things like that. And I'm curious, like, what that process has been like, and maybe it can help to answer the question that this athlete has had.
First off, hopefully my internet connection's okay, because I'm in a hotel right now in Crested Butte. So I guess I wouldn't say that I've worked on like specifically running form. I've done strength training with a strength coach, more so focusing on like weak areas that then I guess might alter form when you're running. So I feel like kind of like you're saying, I don't really recommend that people are like going out and just like trying to constantly improve form or change things up, because I feel like then that can potentially lead to even more risk of injury. But if someone has struggled with like recurrent injury, et cetera, then it might be worthwhile to look into either going to a PT that could help you, or a gait specialist, or a strength coach that works with, I think it's important that the person has experience with runners too, because I think then they're able to maybe look a little bit more closely at, what's going on, and potentially help you figure out like how your running form could be impacting that injury, et cetera. So I went to this person after I started with this person like 1.5 to 2 years ago. because I had foot surgery in 2017 and then had some gait, like I felt like I was just having like hip issues and then just like recurring things happening after the foot surgery. So met with this person who then had me run a little bit, and then looking at like weak areas, etc., had me do some tests strength wise, and then have been working through that even from just like a breathing standpoint too. So like literally working through breathing exercises all the way up to working with weights. So keeping in mind that it might not just be like your traditional view of like what strength training is. It might be like some retraining of breathing, etc. So I don't know if that helps or not, but I just kind of wanted to shed light on like it. For me, it's been a process, a slower process that I'm trying to work on all of these different areas to kind of help overall balance and strength and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and there are just so many different components to this, and like what you said, Kylie, it is a process, and so that does, I think, shed some light on like the athlete asking, what should I expect if I'm trying to change my form? What does that look like? How long does that take? What does that encompass? Sometimes that does, take working on addressing some areas of instability or weakness that you might have that a PT has pointed out to you. I know for me, like I've had some like slight issues with like my right IT band and my right hip. And it's like, oh, when I run on trails, I almost never feel that. But when I run on road, there's something about like the doing that same motion over and over again that like always brings out this weakness that I have. And so like I go to my PT and he's like, all right, we're going to do these 3 things. And then like watch your form when you do like X, Y, and Z, and then like record it and then like see if you've made any improvements. And like, so it's always like about like that ongoing process. And because all of this stuff is neuromuscular, we are developing these biomechanical patterns. They take tens of thousands of repetitions to become habit. We have to engage in this stuff with a long-term growth mindset. We really have to have that infinite mindset. When we go into this, like we're always working to improve this stuff. Maybe, I don't know if my cadence could ever be 100% perfect. Like I want to always work on that. Like, I don't know if my right glute will activate enough. Like I'm always going to like be working on that. And that's really, really normal. I think the longer athletes engage in this process, the more nuance they learn about their bodies, that they're like, oh yeah, like I continually have like this Achilles thing that comes up when I do mountain races, like, and that's because I'm not actually like hiking and using my posterior chain. And so when I'm hiking, I'm always going to work on like striking with my heel first to activate the posterior chain. It's like, that's a subtle form change, but it's something like that takes so many repetitions to become habit, right? And so being of the mind that that's okay and taking your time with this stuff, letting those changes happen over time is really easy. And so like there is like a component to this where we have to manage our progress and frustration around that. And again, I would say just go back to some of those tips that we talked about earlier with regard to like the mental component to all of this. Be gentle with yourself, try not to be judgmental. Just because you are having a little bit of a challenge in changing your form, that is not a referendum on who you are or your athletic abilities. That kind of stuff it's tough. It's tough. We all feel it. We all have an opportunity to then like rise up in those moments and be positive, use that inner coach. Drew, you wrote something here in the chat box. I was wondering if you wanted to just chime in on that.
Yeah. So what I see with a lot of, specifically here in Northwest Arkansas, a lot of beginner road runners is people feel like they don't know how to run, right? Like TJ, you already said, like everyone, you're born pretty much knowing how to run, right? All of us don't look the same, but all of us know how to run. But people maybe feel like they're doing it wrong because they're just new to it, right? And so a lot of times a big mistake is you'll see people jump online first thing, be like, how do I run? Like, what's good running form? And then they're like, oh, I'm supposed to run on my toes, or, oh, I'm supposed to run barefoot, or, oh, I've read this book on chi running and it says that this is the only right way to run. And all of that's bullshit, right? So just stay offline. Like, if you are curious about it, go see your physical therapist. Said it a million times. That's the best thing to do. But really, unless you're like feeling broken, unless you've got something, just to reiterate, like, you're fine. Like, you're totally fine. Just go have fun.
Absolutely. I love that message. Just go have fun. Don't overthink this. Stick to the basics. We have a great blog post on posture. I would recommend that you guys check that out. We've talked about cadence so much. Think about those two things and just run with it. Literally just run with it. Like, you're going to be fine.
I feel like if Zoe were here, Zoe would say all the energy and stress you use trying to figure out how the right running form is should be put towards something else that's more productive for your training.
Yeah. Gosh, you nailed it. Yeah, thank you. We'll do a little Zoe wisdom on that one. Let's move on to everybody's favorite topic. I think this is the hottest topic of like the last 3 years. I swear it's like every quarter someone asks about how to improve their downhill running. This is kind of related to the question about form. So I just wanted to hit both of them while we can. Kristen, you want to give us a little knowledge drop on this?
Yeah. The best way to improve your downhill running is to run more downhills, and not just running downhills, but running downhills with intention. So just like you do in skiing, you kind of like, look down the line you're taking, and follow that. But like, I think a lot of people, as Drew mentioned too, like use downhills as an opportunity to recover and mind. And that's great if that's what is programmed into your plan for the day. If you're doing a hill workout and you have like an easy recovery down, take that easy recovery down. But if you have a hill workout and you have, like, sometimes I'll put in an athlete's log, like, run the downhills with intention as you would in a race. And that's just a way for them to practice, like, picking up their feet, moving fast on the downhill, and sort of building that confidence. I've had athletes who have had ankle issues, ankle injuries before, where we're like, building up to a race, and it's like, okay, we got to get you more comfortable on downhill technical trails. So we're going to do more downhill technical trails. So just getting yourself familiar with like the muscle memory you need to go downhill fast and like stay in control is really important. But yeah, I think just like uphills, running downhills take a lot of concentration and focus.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys both mentioning that, this stuff just takes practice. And Drew, in your comments, when we unplug on the downhill and we don't use it as an opportunity, we can get ourselves into some trouble and then end up in a race situation or a long run where we're really struggling through certain types of terrain. And I think it's just so vital, like Kristen mentioned, run your downhills with intention. I think you will often see that leading up to a big race in training logs if you work with me, because this is neuromuscular, like Kristen mentioned, we're developing muscle memory. We need to practice these things. And two, there's also all of this eccentric loading that happens on your quads when you're running downhill. So if you don't practice running downhill with purpose, you get to race day and then you're trying to move a little bit quicker, your quads are going to get really sore. Because you didn't put that work in. And so I do like to have athletes really focus on uphill training. It's great. We love it. We talk about uphill till we're blue in the face, but preparing the quads for those downhills is really, really vital, because as soon as those quads go, we lose our neuromuscular control. We can't move with agility. We can't then deal with the different terrain and how technical it becomes. So we need to practice this stuff. I would say if you're kind of new to running technical trail, gradually ease your way in to more technical stuff over the course of a couple months. Use a summer to start with some like fire roads, some easy 4x4 road downhilling. And, that's a great way to like really build strength in your quads. And then you can start to take that to trails that have some more rocks and some roots. And then, maybe eventually you're just blasting down scree fields, like, I don't know, like Kylie's husband or something. And it's, so there's just different iterations of this. And we have to like start with the basics, and over time we're going to build up. I personally, you're not going to get a workout for me that's a downhill workout, because it's not going to work your aerobic system very much. But because this stuff is kind of like, I like the free mile mentality to running downhill. You have so much gravity. You can push a lot harder on the downhills because there is so little aerobic emphasis there. It's not hard cardiovascularly. So if you're pushing, and particularly in your long runs, this is like the key time to practice that. Try to practice in your long runs the same effort you would use at your race. Because basically what you do on your long runs will be really similar to how you perform at your race. So it's pretty easy. We want to just practice those downhills. Like, you can work on agility and stuff. Coach Drew kind of mentioned this earlier. There's like, you could do ladder drills and different plyometrics, which can absolutely help with, just developing all around like athletic ability and good footwork, but there's never going to be any substitute to actually getting out on the trail and working on it. Any final thoughts on this? Drew, Kylie, Sarah? Cool. Well, thanks guys. I know only got about 10 minutes left, and there has been a hot topic of athletic greens on our you're in our Google Doc for a long time. You're hearing about it more and more. So Kylie, give us the 101. Are athletic greens worth it? Should we be investing our money in athletic greens?
Well, it depends on who you're asking. If it's an influencer, then they're going to tell you that it is 100% worth it to be getting athletic greens. I think why we're seeing so much more of this is because they are providing funding to a lot of podcasts and group coaches, those sorts of things. And I mean, those people are then essentially making money off of it. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but I try to kind of discourage people from, getting caught up in the hype of any new like supplement or product that they might hear on a podcast, et cetera. And kind of, I'm glad that the question comes up, because then at least I know that somebody is thinking about like, is this something that I need versus like, I'm just going to go purchase it and start spending $90 to $100 a month. So, I mean, one of the things that I would say is, or a couple of things, I guess, that are a red flag with athletic greens, if you actually look on their label, they have like things on the label that are proprietary blends. So whenever I see the word proprietary blend, that's automatically like a little bit of a red flag for me and for my athletes, because I want to know exactly how much of certain herbs or things that are in a product are actually on the label. And if there's a blend there, that's not really giving me that insight. And I've actually had athletes email Athletic Greens, and they haven't been able to give them a breakdown of what that proprietary blend is. So number one, I find that interesting. Number two, you kind of need to ask yourself, like, what am I using this for? So if you are, just using it occasionally as a supplement, like if you are a business person and you travel a lot and maybe you don't get in enough fruits and vegetables when you're traveling, it could be a way to kind of supplement and get a little bit extra in. But at the same time, I usually tell people there are also other brands that are a third of the price that you could get pretty much the exact same thing. One of them being Amazing Grass is a is a company that has one, and it's like a third of the price of athletic greens. So thinking about, if I really need this, do I really need to spend $90 to $100 every month getting this athletic greens supplement? The other thing is, are you using it as a maybe an excuse to like not work on your nutrition and get in like actual whole foods and fruits and vegetables? Now, I do work with athletes that are like, I don't eat a single fruit or vegetable, in which case, then maybe it would be beneficial for you. But for a lot of people, they're maybe overcomplicating, like, what does it look like to eat fruits and vegetables? Or like they think that they have to eat 30 different fruits and vegetables for it to actually benefit them. And I encourage people to maybe rethink their relationship to that sort of thing, and think about like, what fruits and vegetables, like, if any, do I like, and focus on those versus like, oh, I need to eat 30 different colors of fruits and vegetables. So maybe rethinking that relationship to like fruits, veggies, etc. If you feel like you have a problem with them or like don't really like them. I think sometimes people will also use it as a maybe more of a multivitamin supplement as well. And again, I think that looking at it from the perspective of, are you using this as a crutch where you don't want to maybe look at your diet, or what are you using it for? And then I would argue that there are some really great multivitamin products out there that you wouldn't have to spend $90 to $100 on. So opinion wise, like I will, if somebody wants to do it, like I'll support them if I think that they have a valid reason for wanting to get the supplement. But I do have some concerns about the product, being like, that proprietary blend thing is odd to me. I don't think that everyone needs a green supplement. And I think that a lot of these things can be solved if you are putting just a little bit of intentionality into your diet. And then thinking about the price point, like, why is it $90 to $100 a month? Like, you can get other really good quality supplements that are not $90 to $100 a month and have the same beneficial effect. And then I will say, like, for people that travel a lot for business, like, it could be a good option. But again, I would encourage you to consider, like, do I actually need athletic greens, or could I get another really good quality supplement? So that's my 5-minute overview.
I mean, you nailed it. We don't need to say much else than that. I think that, regular diet. Drew had a comment in our community calls doc here earlier, physical health. It's all about, eating well. I would say, think about what's on your plate. Are you eating a balanced plate? Are you eating whole fruits and vegetables? And as much as you can. And that's, if you're struggling with that, I would recommend working with somebody like Kylee or another, registered dietitian out there who works, primarily with athletes, and developing, a strong habit around, what are you eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? What are your snacks like? There's no real replacement for the whole food in my mind. However, like, I do personally, like, I like Gnarly nutrition products. They have like a greens thing. It does have like a blend, like you mentioned, but I have personally liked using that when I travel to Europe, or go to other places where, like, culturally they just don't eat as much fruits and vegetables. Like, I eat a huge salad every day, no matter what. Like, I always eat my greens. And it's like, when you travel, you're not always you don't have as much control over what you eat. And so having an ability to adapt can be really useful when maybe you don't have as much control over what's on your plate. But again, like probably not great to use this stuff long term. Also, that price point. I mean, I know like gnarly is like $43 for a huge thing of it, and I've had the same one for like a year. So pretty good
and also
investment.
I want to add gnarly nutrition. They will give you the exact breakdown of everything. Like they're very, very open, transparent, and very science-based. I'm a big supporter of their company because of that. And so I think it's really interesting when supplement companies aren't willing to be transparent. It's automatically a red flag for me if they're not willing. Like if I have people email them and they won't, reveal what maybe is in their product. So
yeah, gosh, their marketing though, they really know they've got a strong corner in the podcast market, and I think that's why everybody's so interested in it. They hear about it on the Swap podcast, and it's increasing HRV and things like that. And again, you kind of just have to take all that with a grain of salt. Like, are we going back to some of these things that Kylee mentioned? For people who find that this stuff does increase their HRV, what does their actual diet look like? We're not really sure. I have my suspicions there, but I would encourage everybody to work on having a balanced plate, that includes fruits, vegetables, fats, protein, carbohydrates. Like if you can do that, you are worlds, in front of where you really like need to be. And as athletes, like our physical health is related to a lot of what we consume. And so if we're not eating, good foods and having that balanced plate, we can start to see our bodies break down and things like that. We don't want to use supplements as a crutch to replace, bad habits that we've created in other areas. Kylee, last word on this?
I think I kind of said the last word already, but essentially, like, it's not necessary for you to don't feel pressured to do $90 to $100 green supplement. If you want a green supplement, there's some other great companies out there. I think it's hard for people to hear sometimes, like, just eat more fruits and vegetables and you'll be okay, because some people really struggle with that. So I think that if you are struggling with that, there are some strategies that you can try to employ just to increase overall like consumption of those vitamins and minerals from plant-based sources. And if you are struggling with something like that, I'm not saying you have to work with like us or me and Emily as dietitians, but yeah, reach out to someone and we can kind of guide you through the process and help you figure out like what you can do to maybe just do that on your own. But otherwise, you don't need athletic greens.
Yeah. Save your money, get into an awesome race that you've always dreamed of, similar price points. Thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I really enjoyed this conversation today. I got to talk about some of the things that I find most interesting in the process here. Hope everybody has a good weekend. We are not having a call next week, but we'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a good one. Have a good weekend. Thanks, coaches. Great job.